Welcome to the Passages from the Heart podcast, a podcast featuring real people sharing real stories about adventure out on the water. I'm your host, Shell Hart.
Ahoy, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Passages from the Heart podcast. Today's episode is a very special one, and I'm going to be coming at you here with a collaborative project with Jerome Rand of the Sailing into Oblivion podcast. And we're going to be covering the topic of how to stay safe on the boat. And we sort of came up with this idea of some topics to discuss with y'all, 15 at first initially, and we actually decided to narrow that down. And some of these things will sort of delve into, for example, how to go up the mast safely, for example, and going up fore on the deck and preventing falls and tripping and preventing going overboard, things like preventing electrical fires, through-hull failures, rigging failures. And we also talk about strategies to prevent seasickness and the importance of staying hydrated when you're out there on the water. And then also, one of the ones that sort of really was on my mind a lot this season is getting hit in the head by the boom or actually being swept off the boat by the boom. So we do really dive fairly significantly, I would say, into these subject matters. And so we hope that this will just give you some food for thought. It's just sort of an overview, I realize, and we're not saying, specifically you have to do this or do that. These are just suggestions that with all of the years of experience that Jerome has had and also being a professional in the industry, and also myself, of course, I'm an amateur, but I, don't have so much offshore sailing experience, but I do have sailing experience from some years. Just we're hoping to share collectively some of these things we've gained as knowledge and just put it out there for you guys to digest. I wanted to mention in the podcast, I talk about some books, and I just wanted to reiterate the names of some of those books to you so that you have them to refer to when the time is right, I guess I would say. So one of the books that I wanted to make mention of is there's actually two books by Andrew Evans. One is called Single-Handed Sailing: Thoughts, Tips, Techniques, and Practices. And the other one is titled Single-Handed Sailing: 2 Points West of Sanity. And again, both of those books are by Andrew Evans. Some of the other books that I make mention of are the Chapman Piloting Seamanship and Small Boat Handling, as well as The Boy Who Fell to Shore: The Extraordinary Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Thomas Thor Tangvald, which was written by Charles J. Doane, or I'm not sure if he pronounces it Doane or Doane, so that's Doane. And then last but not least, I want to also make mention of 2 episodes ago, I believe episode 32, I had the pleasure to visit with Captain Istvan Kopar, and I mentioned a book, or we were discussing a book that he had written, and I don't believe that I even stated the name of it while we were talking about it, which was a huge oversight on my part. I did include that in the video description and podcast notes. However, I wanted to make mention of that book here because it is really a wonderful read as well. And that book is called Kahivesh: Alone at the Ends of the Earth. And again, that's by Istvan Kopar, or Captain Istvan Kopar, with Robert Farley. So these are some great books I would recommend taking a look at if you get an opportunity to. And again, I do reference them within this podcast. In other news, not really much news to report, I guess, since the last time I came at you in episode 33. But I really hope that this episode with Jerome will be something special for you guys as well. I think this is one that I've already listened to it about 5 times now, because there's just really so much information that Jerome shares that is incredibly helpful, and things that I want to just keep in my sailor's toolbox, or just boater's toolbox. This applies to boating safely on all kinds of vessels. All right, guys, with that, let's get on to the show.
Yeah, go right ahead, Shell.
Okay. So welcome back to another special episode, a duel, if you will, a little collaboration with Jerome Rand of Sailing into Oblivion. Jerome, welcome. Thanks for joining me here on the Passages from the Heart podcast.
It is absolutely my pleasure. And yes, duly noted, we will be pushing this out on the old Sailing into Oblivion platform sometime in the very near future. So thank you. I'm very excited. Safety. We're getting into the real crux of the situation of, safety on a small boat, a big boat, an ocean, a lake. It's all wrapped up into one. There's a lot of common themes. And moreover, it's all about sort of taking the precautions and knowing some of the dangers, I suppose, before you jump out in there. Because, let's face it, in sailing is kind of inherently a risky thing to do. There's ways to make it safe, but overall, you're putting yourself out there into a little bit of a danger zone. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And I think, this is a topic that's really been fresh on my mind most of this particular season, because I recently have a sailing friend who had an incident where he was solo sailing. I think it was a Catalina 32, and was just one of those things. He's heading back into the marina after a nice sail, and he just got caught off guard, I believe, and he got hit in the head pretty badly. He got knocked down, and I don't believe he was unconscious, but I believe that it was a pretty startling, sort of shocking experience that he described. And yeah, so it just kind of gives me pause. And I think you're right. Sailing is, I mean, you always talk a lot too, just about getting in the car is pretty risky, right? We talk about that before driving, but yeah, for sure. I think just like with driving, maybe not everybody wears a seatbelt. I do. There are things we can do to make sure our vessels are prepared safely, and that we ourselves are preparing ourselves safely to get out on the water.
Yep, absolutely. And to sort of streamline this podcast and make sure that we don't get caught off into the weeds like I always do on my show, we have a list. And originally you shot me over about 15 or so different topics. And I figured, you know what, if we want to do an hour-long podcast, we got to have just about 5-6 minutes with each one, give or take. I'm sure that'll fluctuate. But do you want to kick right off into the first one?
Yeah, sure. Yep. The list actually does start off with exactly the scenario that I described, with getting hit in the head by the boom. And what are some of the things that we can do to, prevent that from becoming a bad thing. Well, it's always a bad thing to get hit in the head, but let's think of ways that we can reduce the chance of that happening. And I think this is, for me, just, I think, Jerome, my background with sailing, and I don't know if the listeners will all know, but just to recap, I did grow up sailing. I remember this sort of thing happening as a kid to some other people, adult sailors. And fortunately, nothing was to the point where it was, somebody was permanently injured, sort of thing. But when I got back into sailing later in life, I did look into some of those ASA courses. And this is definitely something that is covered in the basic, the very first course you take, which I think is just ASA 101. And I think, some of the strategies that they're talking about in that course, I would assume would apply here, which is like mostly I think these things tend to happen when you're jibing the boat. Does that sound fair to say in your opinion, Jerome?
Yeah, I mean, even when you're tacking though, that boom sometimes, depending on the boat, is sort of when the wind isn't in it and the mainsail is flogging away, that boom is doing some pretty big motion and it can catch you off guard and if you're on a larger vessel and that thing hits you, that boom might weigh 60, 80 pounds. And boy, oh boy, you will feel that. Even if it's the smallest knock on the head, that one, it'll definitely get you. But yeah, whether you're on a small little laser, a butterfly or a pram even, it doesn't matter. Like if you get hit by a metal pole, you are definitely going to be feeling that. And the degree of the danger that prevents, I think, just escalates on how windy it is, how squarely you get hit in the head, and the size of the vessel you're on and the weight of that boom.
So it's not necessarily like, it's not always 100% dependent upon what point of sail you're on. It can happen on any point of sail then, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even the other incident people don't really think too much about is, if you're just sailing along on a nice beam reach, and if you stand downwind or on the lee side of the boat and that boom is upwind of you, say you're beating into the wind, and something breaks, a shackle lets go, or the main sheet just becomes uncleated, and all of a sudden that sail sheets way out and takes your head along with it. I've seen that happen. And, I think that is where one of my biggest things about this subject is awareness. So always trying to be aware that you are trying to stay out of any sort of danger zone. And on most boats, if you're seated when any of these maneuvers happen, or at least you're crouched down, that seems to be one of the best remedies, because the one thing that the boom can't really do, or it would be a very rare case, would be to actually drop down to a lower level. The boom's going to stay at a certain height. And as long as you maintain a lower level with your head, you're pretty much in the clear.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I've noticed some of the sailboats that I've been on, some tend to carry the boom higher than others.
Yeah.
I don't really know, why that. I mean, I guess, just however the naval architect designed the boats and the rig, obviously must play into that. But I mean, I will even tell you on my little compact Legacy, here's a scenario where I think you also can be vulnerable, is when you're dropping, or when you're raising or dropping the sail, I think, because I know for me, even with my little compact sloop, I have to take the topping lift off. And then once the topping lift is off, and I do, the Traveler and the main sheet on this boat is very basic, rudimentary, if you will. And so I really have to make sure that this is something that ASA, I wanted to get back to that ASA stuff, is they talk about centering the boom before you prepare for, like, I specifically thought it was for a jibe. I don't remember them saying that for attack. It could be that as well. But, going from that position of taking the topping lift off the end of the boom, the aft end of the boom, and then raising the sail, if you're not making sure that the main sheet is nice and tight, and on my Traveler, you can't set it. There's it's like only like 1.5 feet long, and it slides on the aft end of this, or like just right above the stern, like where the stern pulpit would be. So you really can't secure that part of it. But my point is that when you're raising the sail, if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, and like you were talking about flogging and stuff, that I can see in that situation where the boom's dancing around and you're standing up because you're trying to raise the halyard. It's sometimes not easy to do it from a sitting position with leverage and all that. So, I mean, it is like you have to almost have, whatever that insect is that has eyes all over their head. You have to be really constantly aware of where you are with respect to the boat, regardless of whether the sail is going up or coming down. And
Oh yeah, well,
Yeah,
and
it
it
seems,
it
I don't
is
know.
one of those where, yeah, I mean, obviously you wouldn't have your main sheet tight if you're raising the sail. You know, you have to have that stuff loose so that sail will get all the way up without any sort of load on it or anything like that. And yeah, I mean,
Right.
you know, if it
That's
means
true.
you
Yeah.
have to kneel down and raise that sail, or you have to raise the sail from the mast and get it cleated off there, you know, you have to
Yeah.
kind of just do whatever you're going to do. You know, when that metal pole, the boom is wafting around up there, you know, but again, you hit it on the head. You know, you have
Yeah.
to almost have eyes in the back of your head and really just be aware this is a dangerous little area to be in. And I'm going to take that danger away by removing myself and my head from this area.
Yeah, I think now that I think back, you're absolutely right. That's the problem that I ran into with my strategy back then, is that I went to try to raise the mainsail and I could only get it so far because the main sheet was too tight. So you're right. I've totally forgot about that. But I guess what I was trying to think of is just a way to keep it as steady as possible. But you're right, with that particular situation, you would have to release it, because otherwise
It
I
needs
wouldn't,
to be
I wasn't
free.
able to get the
Yeah.
sail all the way up otherwise.
Right, right. And that's, you know,
Um,
that's just inherent. That's just part of it. When you're raising the sail, when you're jibing, when you're tacking, the boom's going to be moving. And as long as you know that that thing's going to be moving, you can pretty easily stay out of its way for that short amount of time that it really is a threat.
so what are your thoughts, before we move to the next topic? Because I know we were saying like about 5 to 6
Yeah,
minutes
it's
per
gonna be
one,
hard.
but I just was
Some
curious.
topics I'm
Uh,
sure will end up
and
droning
and go,
on
the
a bit
timer
more.
set.
Yeah.
I was just curious what you thought about, some sailors have talked about wearing helmets, especially solo sailors. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you ever considered something like that? Because I think I actually have. If I were to go out on my boat alone, it might not be a bad idea. But have you ever heard anybody really talk much about that topic?
We used to slap helmets on some of the kids in the sailing school, and that was mostly if it was kind of a windier day or whatever, and it was a small group that we were going out with. Yeah, it's just like a nice little added precaution for sure. And they make, you know, they're almost like little bicycle helmets, so they don't really encroach on your visibility too much. And most of the kids would be wearing a hat anyway for the sun, so that, you know, I think it's a fine option if you feel comfortable wearing one. Go for it. It's definitely going to add some protection, but at the same time, I will say that, you know, if you have you may have a helmet on, but if you get absolutely whacked by that boom, you know, you might be dealing with neck injuries. You might actually get propelled overboard. The only thing I would caution there is that it might give you a false sense of security of, you know, oh, I'm invincible against the boom, so now I can kind of mess around and stand up and do all these things that I normally wouldn't. And I think that's going to be
Right.
kind of a common theme throughout this podcast of sometimes the equipment that is supposed to be quote unquote safety sometimes has the ability to give you a false sense of security or a false sense of safety rather than actually, you know, doing what it's just intended to do. I think sometimes there's side effects, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about that before on your or you've talked about that before on your show with respect to, tethering and jack lines and things like that. And not to totally, divert our conversation, but I
Well, we'll
agree
be
with
getting
what you're
into
saying.
that
I think
stuff
it
soon.
can make us, yeah. And speaking of being thrown overboard, I have heard of that happening, and actually the person that was the boom just swept her right off the boat, and they were not able to recover her. So, not to be doom and gloom, but you're absolutely right. It's just not only being hit in the head; it is, you can be actually just swept off the boat too. So,
Did
yeah,
somebody
definitely.
recover her?
So what had happened was this happened a long time ago, and it's a book. I read about it in a book, and I can't remember the Charles Doan or Doan. I think he is an editor for one of the sailing magazines, and he wrote this book, and it was basically about this young man and who grew up in a sailing family. His father and mother were circumnavigating, and anyway, so evidently the second wife, because the first wife was murdered by pirates, I believe, was what happened when they were sailing somewhere in this, I don't remember where specifically. But his father married again, and they were I think they were sailing across the Atlantic from east to west. I think that's where it was. And I could be wrong on that, but she just came up on deck to do something. I think she was like hanging laundry or something. And he was a very small boy when this happened, I believe. But yeah, the boom just whoop right off the boat. And it was his father himself and then his baby sister, and who was probably literally a baby. And they weren't able to retrieve her. So, by the way, that's a really good book. I highly recommend. I'll have to put that in the show notes. I think it's The Boy Who Fell from Shore, a really interesting story about this young man who grew up in a sailing family, became a sailor himself, and who eventually, I believe, was also lost at sea. But yeah, I won't give too much more away on that.
Sounds like that was a bit of a it sounds like their whole family had a little bit of a curse, if you will, out on.
Well, that was kind of the theme.
That was bad things.
It was thematic in the book. Yeah, because yes, yeah. The other thing that was, well, I shouldn't give it away. There's so many things that will just blow your mind in the book. Yeah, but yeah. So this definitely is. I don't know if you when we're done doing all this, if you could even rate these in terms of which one is the most fearsome or dangerous of all the things we'll discuss. But I guess I would say, in my mind, at least, this is probably up there. This whole thing with the boom, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to take into account. Yeah, I think it's gonna be hard to rate, prioritize these, but I think they're all definitely valid concerns, and something that everybody should be sort of made aware of, that the dangers do lie in some of these 10 lists, this list that we have of 10 specific ones.
Well, I'm wondering if you would take the next one, because I have never done this except for when I was a kid.
Oh, sure.
And I don't even think I went all the way I didn't even go all the way to the top. I think I was just helping my dad with a burgee. So I was at the spreaders.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. So our second one is going up the mast safely. Now, this one for sure puts a little bit of stands everybody's hairs on their back of their neck up when you mention going up the mast, especially if you have to do this out at sea in any sort of sea state. And I would say that's probably one of the best or first things that you want to consider is, what's the environment that you're dealing with, and is it a must that you go up that mast? I've been in situations where I had, a sail that couldn't come down, a squall coming in, and I really didn't have any choice, but I had to get up that mast quickly, undo the damaged part, and then zip back down as fast as I could. And, in that case in particular, I was very glad that I have steps or a sort of a ladder, fixed little pegs on Mighty Sparrow's mast, so I can get up and I can get down without having to do the other safety things like hooking up a halyard to a bosun's chair or anything like that. And, I prefer being able to just scramble up the mast real quick and then scramble back down if I can. But it really does take a pretty decent sea state or some sort of issue that's going on that I have to deal with immediately. Now, in all the general purpose, going up a mast, and let's just say for this instant, we're talking about doing it in a marina where the boat is pretty much stable. There's very little sway. There's no wave action. And that one, obviously, if you have that situation, being tethered in somehow, either with a climbing harness or a bosun's chair, and having a second person to tail the halyard that's going up, that you're actually putting your weight on, is, I think, the safest way to go about it. I've seen people do multiple lines and things like that, and I have always cautioned people about that, because you want to keep these systems as simple as possible. And if you have a pretty heavy duty halyard that can easily support, 10 times your weight, if you tie it off correctly using a bowline and not a quick release shackle or anything like that. So you've got your bowline onto your harness or your bosun's chair, then you're essentially, that's going to be your safety net right there. If you add a secondary, now all of a sudden you've added this extra line. The threat of getting tangled up in this thing becomes twice as bad because you've added that second line, even though, when you think about it at first, you're like, oh, I'll have a little extra safety line. Well, sometimes those get complicated. Plus, that person who's down on the deck that is really the person you're depending on to tail the halyard and keep the whole system nice and smooth now has to deal with two different lines. And sometimes it can very easily become a little bit confusing. Which line is this one? Which one is that one? And then before you know it, something else happens. So one of my rules is always keep this as simple as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to say, because I've heard sort of two schools of thought on the whole mast steps. So you do have them, you said, right? Aboard Mighty Sparrow?
Yes, I've got them on Mighty Sparrow.
Okay. And so can you see, I think the thing that I hear people say, the reason why they may not have them is because things can get caught on them, halyards and whatnot, or sails. But for you, would you just say the benefit outweighs, obviously, I would assume, that risk of something like that happening in your mind, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can learn better techniques to, keep the halyards out of the steps. And, every once in a while it's still going to happen and all that sort of stuff. But you can get better and better with your halyard work to the point where, you're not getting caught up in those. But, if you go the other route and you just don't have them because you don't want that hassle, well, then you just don't have them. So every time you want to go up that mast, you're going to have to use a halyard and you're going to have to be hooked in, or you're going to have to try and climb it like a coconut tree, which I know some people that do that, and I still don't have any idea how they actually do it without slipping down the mast. I mean, unless it's on like a little 22-foot boat and you can really grip that thing. Oh my gosh, the idea of going up the mast without my steps on them, oh, it sounds like a nightmare.
Well, here's maybe a dumb question, and I'm showing my ignorance because I have not done this before. But should somebody wear specific types of clothing when they're going up a mast, like to protect their legs or their arms? Or, I mean, would anything, I don't know. I would assume sharp things when you're going up the mast you could get easily cut on. Do people wear, I don't know. And bringing up helmets again, I've heard of people who actually do that as well. They'll wear, I've seen on some social media where even some people will be critical of someone going up their mast and not wearing a helmet when they do that. Now, I don't know if that person was by themselves doing it or if there was somebody down below helping out. But when you fall from something that high, yeah, unless you have a trampoline below you, it's probably not going to be good news, right? But is there anything anybody can do? Should you wear, any kind of protective clothing or anything to help you going up the mast, or is that just kind of an insignificant thing? And it's just, I don't know.
I think that would be the only thing I would consider is, what your temperatures are outside. If it's kind of a chilly, windy day, you might be sort of sheltered and warm when you're down on the deck level. But if you have to do, a little half an hour or more project up at the top of the mast, you should definitely take into account that it's going to be chilly up there. And the last thing you want to do is lose your dexterity with the tools that you're using and all that sort of stuff. So I would say trying to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. There really shouldn't be any sharp things on your mast because, the sails quite often rub against most areas on a mast. And so obviously if you did have sharp areas, that's something you want to either cover with tape or file down or something like that. So, you don't have
Right.
other problems. But yeah, I mean, as far as the helmet, if somebody feels more comfortable and confident doing that, I would give it a big thumbs up because, hey, that's the name of the game. You don't want to be going up a mast, a bag of nerves, thinking you're going to fall, being terrified. You want to be as confident and comfortable as humanly possible. And then, you're going to be able to, with that confidence, focus on the task at hand, focus on not dropping tools, things like that. I mean, a lot of people will actually tie most of their tools off onto like a little tether so that even if they do drop it, which does happen, it doesn't hit the deck or possibly hit the person who is, tailing the winch down below, because sometimes these winches are right there on the mast. And if ideally that second person who is sort of belaying you, once they get you to the height that you want to be at to do your project, they're gonna hopefully have two different systems to make sure that halyard's not going to slip. Either it's going through a clutch, which you can then close, and that locks the halyard off. But then from the clutch, it's also going around a winch and then is secured either to a cleat or in the self-tailing unit with a safety loop. And then that second person can back away. They don't want to sit right underneath you. You kind of want to just back away and keep your eye on the person and look and listen for when, that person either needs to go back down or if they're having a problem or something like that.
Okay, well, two more little questions on this topic that I have. One is, well, what do you do or what would you recommend for someone who may have a fear of heights? Or and let's say there's someone who may be single-handing, are there any sorts of things a person can do to sort of minimize that your stomach dropping sensation and to sort of stay focused? You know how they say when you're sailing to, or on a boat in general, to look at the horizon to help reduce the motion sickness, possibly. I would assume that when you're up at the top of the mast, things are more exacerbated up there, or exaggerated. I mean, the motion of the boat, like you said, if you're out at sea and, you don't want to go up when the seas are really rolly, I get that, but maybe it's not totally flat calm and you do have to go up. I mean, is there a way, any recommendations you have for people to deal with that and not let it prevent them from getting done what they need to get done up there?
Well, I think on the first note, as far as having a fear of heights, and I definitely have a fear of heights. It turns my stomach anytime I'm up at the top of the mast, which is only about 45 feet. I think it's one of those where you just have to practice. And, if you don't want to practice right on a boat, I would say go to a climbing gym and spend as much time as you can, because if you get that experience and you keep practicing over and over again, eventually I would think that fear would start to ease and ebb away the more experience you have with going aloft, whether it's on a climbing wall or actually on a mast. So that would be my recommendation for that. If you just can't get over that fear, then if you're a solo sailor, it's going to be a tricky one because you can't depend on somebody else to do it. But if you're working on a boat that has a lot of people on it, if you've got this just death-defying fear of going aloft, then I wouldn't go aloft. I would find somebody else that can do it for you, just because you do need to be focused up there. And with the second one, as far as, if you're going aloft out at sea, the main thing, especially when the wave action is there or the swell, is that you definitely are super focused on the fact that mast may only be moving a couple of inches down at deck level, but up at the top, it's going to be moving 6 feet in either direction. And you are going to have to hold on. Even if you have a bosun's chair and a halyard and all that sort of stuff, it's still going to be flinging you around. And that's something you definitely have to just consider beforehand, whether it's actually safe, if it's 100% necessary that you go up right now, these are the questions that you want to be asking yourself before you strap in and just start making your way up. When I climb Mighty Sparrow's mast out at sea to go and just take a bird's eye view of the world around me, it doesn't take much swell at all for it to be a clinging on sort of experience where I'm exhausted by the time I get back down, even if I'm only up there for 5 minutes, because I'm having to use so much muscle to be able to just hold myself against that mast. And, you know, it's really just being aware that that will be an issue up there. And if the project that you're trying to do, the reason that you're going up aloft is something that, you know, doesn't quite need to be done at that moment, then don't do it. Don't do it until it gets calmer, or you can position the boat in a better way so that, you know, maybe you're not getting rocked fore and aft and side to side, but maybe you can somehow, I don't know, heave to, and then that will settle the whole boat down a little bit. These are sort of the things that you want to consider.
Well, I would say for someone like me who's in a landlocked area that I am, with no access really to professional services for help with something where going up the mast is concerned, you know, I'll do a little plug for Jerome. I use Jerome's consulting services many a time, and so for me, if I were to do something like this I would reach out to Jerome and ask for some guidance. But you know, is there something aside from, I mean, in your mind, do you know of, have you ever come across a book or a video or something that someone could, you know, take a look at to help them learn how to safely do this if they don't have access to you, say, for example? You know, have you ever come across anything like that? And, you know, I don't know, what is that famous book of sailing? I can't think of the name of it. Not Pilot. What is it called? It's like at the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it. There's got to be something like an encyclopedia of sailing, and they would have, I would think, some sort of section on this sort of topic. But I mean, have you ever seen anything like this where someone could learn more about how to safely do this?
Honestly, I don't think I've ever seen anything that on the internet or anything like that. Now, granted, I haven't really been looking, but it's one of those where all the information that I ever received on the subject was from, you know, other sailors or actually riggers, the people who are actually working aloft all the time. They do it as their career. They have probably the greatest wealth of knowledge, especially of self-climbing systems and things like that, because typically most riggers will not go and hop on your boat and have you tail their halyard up there. They like to do it themselves. And although most of these boats are either on the hard or, you know, in a marina or something like that, they definitely are the ones. They're the little spider monkeys up there on the mast all the time, every day sort of thing. And so if you have a rigger that's anywhere in the area, they'd be a great source of information, and they can show you firsthand. You know, you might have to pay them, but, you know, you can trust what they're telling you, I think, a whole lot more than anything you're going to see, especially on the internet, because I've definitely seen quite a few examples of people doing it very, very incorrectly, where they, you know, they shackle off the halyard to the bosun's chair, which is a big no-no. And, you know, little things like that where you're just thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, this is terrible information to be out there. But, you know, that's one of the issues with the internet, right?
Right. Well, that's one of the reasons why I was hoping we could do this podcast, is because I know, you know, you have so much experience and knowledge with where these topics are concerned, and, you know, you do this professionally. So, I mean, you're not a rigger, I know, professionally, but you do your own rigging, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe some people have paid you to do their
Well,
rigging. I'm not really
I send
sure.
people up their masts all the time. A lot of my clients that'll be part of the coaching session is, you know, safely, and I'm usually just orchestrating. So if it's a team, a couple or something like that, you know, the one person's going up the mast, the other person is tailing it, and I'm talking them through how to do it safely, how to do it correctly. And it's a simple system. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated, but there's just those basics that really need to be sort of focused on. And once you've got those down, you do it the same way every single time, and you're not going to have any issues.
Well, I'm going to have to like repeat everything that when I go back to listen to it and make sure that I remember everything you said. Cause I think, yeah, I foresee in my future where I may need to be doing something like this, and I want to make sure that I do it safely. Okay. Anything else that you want to add about
Nope.
going up the mast safely?
Nope. I think that one's pretty good. I mean, you could go on and on about that, and there's a lot of stuff that we didn't talk about. So it's not like an instruction thing, but an overview, sort of bird's eye view of going up the mast and things to consider. And I think we covered that pretty well.
Awesome. Okay. How about the next item on our list? This one is, I think, probably happens more than most things as far as, bad things that can happen. So preventing falls and tripping on the boat and falling overboard. Have you ever had that happen? Have you fallen overboard?
No, I have never fallen overboard. The only time the closest I ever came to falling overboard was tripping over a jack line on a dead still night where we were motoring towards Bermuda. And sometimes you get those little hazards. And again, I always thought it was kind of ironic that the thing that was supposed to prevent me and save me from doing so was actually the cause of my closest call of falling overboard. I mean, I was windmilling my arms as I just about went over the lifelines. But no, I think it really is just one of those where making sure that you don't have an over cluttered deck really, really is the linchpin here, because it is not. It's no joke when people go on passages and they've got a dinghy that's lashed down on the foredeck, and then they have paddle boards, and then you've got all this other safety lines, and you've got your jack lines going over the top of those, and then you have your halyards running around, and then you have got cleats. I mean, there are a million things that you could trip over if you add all of that stuff. And if wherever possible, if you can stash that stuff that's on the deck that's needing to be lashed to it, if you can get that down below or get it aft or anywhere else, I always recommend that, because you want a nice clean walkway from the bow to the stern back to the cockpit to be able to just move knowing that your toe isn't going to wrap up on any little thing. And if you can have the deck set up like that, I mean, it's fantastic. But we live in the real world, and a lot of boats are going to have those issues. So I think, trying to minimize the amount of tripping hazards going along the deck from aft to forward is probably one of the main things that I would look for to minimize the risk of tripping and falling overboard.
Yeah, I was reading some book. I don't remember who it was by, and I want to say maybe it was Andrew Evans who wrote that like single-handed sailing Bible type book. But somebody, again, I don't know for sure it was his book, but somebody had talked about almost like memorizing where the lines are on the boat, so that, like, for example, if it's dark out and most people probably have some sort of headlamp on or something, but just developing a body memory, if you will, of where things are on the boat. Like imagining if you could do it blindfolded, like you could walk from stern to stem or whatever with your eyes closed and not trip on something. You know what I mean? Because you would just know your boat that well. I mean, I don't think that's super realistic for a lot of people, maybe. I know for myself, probably not. And one of the other things I would say that I feel like factors into this, I'm just speaking for myself. I won't speak for others, but I know as I've aged, my balance is not as what it once was. And it's not for lack of trying to exercise my ability to be have good balance still. I'm a very active person, but there is something to be said about that. And I have, I just was talking to another online sailor friend of mine, and he just he said, I think I've aged out of this boat. And I think his boat is like 21 feet. He has a sloop. And he's like, I think that I've aged out of this boat. I just don't feel like I can navigate on deck very well anymore. I need more space. So I think he's 79. So instead of getting a smaller boat, like a lot of people think, oh, I'm older now, I need a smaller boat, so I'm just going to sell a big one and get a small one. Well, he's the opposite school of thought. He values deck space and doesn't want to have the risk of tripping or because of the clutter because there's not as much real estate on a small boat on deck, right? So I think there's something to be said for that. Not everybody's maybe at the seasoned age that I am, or they have to worry about that. But yeah, I don't have the spider legs like I once had when I was younger. And that does sometimes cause me some concern when I'm going up on deck, for sure.
Well, and a big solution, or at least something that will help in that situation, is making sure that the vessel has a pretty good amount of handholds. Because, anytime I go forward on the deck, even in calm conditions, I'm not just using my feet, I'm also using my hands. That old adage of one hand for you and one hand for the boat. Well, I'm typically using two hands and 2 feet when I go fore and aft, anytime I'm in motion. And then when I get to where I'm going, I'm usually going to either kneel down or I'm going to sit down. Standing on a boat without holding on to anything is just lunacy. I don't even care if you're hooked in and clipped in, with 2 tethers on a jack line and all that sort of stuff. You should always be holding on to something because this boat is in motion, and the motion of these waves is all forever changing. And that needs to be taken into account because, you might have the rhythm down, but then that oddball wave comes and hits you and you don't really think about it. And all of a sudden, boom, you get shoved in the wrong direction. You're off balance and over you go. And, even if you are clipped in, that is one heck of a battle you are in for, trying to, if your body goes over those lifelines and then starts, even halfway dangling into the water and the boat's moving, trying to wrestle yourself back on deck is not an easy thing. I've never tried it myself. I hope I never have to. But it's, that's something to be, I think, taken into consideration is how many things are you going to be able to hold on to while you're moving fore and aft on the vessel underway. And the more you have, the better off you're going to be.
Well, it's interesting. As you were talking about that and getting back up on the boat, I read not too long ago Andrew Evans' second book. I think it's like 2 Points West of Sanity or something. It just came out not that long ago. And, again, remember, this is the guy who wrote like the Bible of single-handed sailing. I think it was published back in the 90s maybe, and it's sold millions of copies. Well, this guy, Mr. Evans, he was going to do the Transpac last year. And I think he's in British Columbia, Vancouver Island area, maybe somewhere in there, but he has had an Olsen 30. I believe that's what it was. And so he was setting sail from British Columbia and was going to sail to San Francisco. Well, I don't know how many miles offshore he was, but he had something happen where he had to go up on deck, and he was on his stomach up on the foredeck, and he was on, he went up on the, here's something else that could be worthy of mention. When you're walking forward, windward or leeward, right? You're going to want to, we can get to that, but he walked up on the windward side of the boat.
Yeah,
but
always
had to,
windward.
Yeah, and so he had to lay down on his stomach because he had to fix something on the leeward side of the boat. I don't know if it was, I don't remember if it was a clue I don't know what it was that was happening, but he had to lay down. So he was face down on his stomach with his head on the leeward side of the boat and his legs up more on the windward side, but some roly-poly motion, wave action literally threw him off the boat, through the lifelines. Okay. And
yeah,
he said that probably the thing that saved him and he wasn't in the water long, and he never had fallen overboard in all these years that he's been sailing until this happened. And he remarked that for him, the Olsen 30 has really a low freeboard. And so he said that that was the saving grace, because he was able to just basically, because of the boats, how much the boat, whatever it was heeling at, was such that he was able to basically wrap a leg around a stanchion and then pull himself back on the boat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very lucky, it sounds like. But yeah, I mean, you can, if the boat heels over, you might be laying flat, at one moment because the boat's not heeled over all that much. But if a wave gets you, or a puff of breeze or something like that, out of nowhere, that deck can be tilted at 30 or 40 degrees even. And yeah, you'll slide right off of that thing. So, trying to brace yourself around any project or whatever you're trying to do at that moment. I would always recommend trying to keep your feet underneath you if you can.
Okay, that's a good point. And maybe I have that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that he had illustrations, I think, or AI generated images or something that he makes. He does say it's created by AI when he uses these to give people an idea of what things look like at the time when this incident. There were several incidents. Let me just say, this one only of the overboard situation, and that is a fantastic book. I recommend it as well. But I believe that that's how he was positioned, where he was laying across the deck from, port to starboard, like, across. I could be wrong, but I think that is. But good point. Keeping your legs underneath you, that makes sense. Like maybe crouching, I guess, in a situation like that. And he was tethered, by the way, too. That was the other thing I was going to say. The other thing I wanted to say about this topic before we move on to the next one is, you can fall overboard, not when you're on the boat, but when you're trying to get on or off the boat. And that's my experience. I actually fell. I was trying to board a sailboat from a dock, and I think it was one of those, my that expression about how your eyes are bigger than your stomach. Well, this applied to my ability as far as how far out I thought I could be from the boat to get on board. I underestimated that, and I went in between the boat and the dock, and that was not very fun.
Well, and
it happened when I was
usually with that one, just because we got to keep moving on. For time and everything. But with that one, especially when you're boarding a boat, you always want to get your hands on it before you step onto it. And that will hopefully negate that idea of like, oh, the gap is pretty big. I can't reach the boat, but I could probably step onto it or jump onto it. That rule kind of gets that out of the way. So you got to either switch up your lines or do something and bring the boat in closer. But yeah, you always want to board the vessel in a spot where you can grab onto either the lifeline or, even better, one of the standing rigging, either the cap shroud or something like that. So you can get your hand on something nice and firm, so that, that'll give you the extra little safety measure of being able to hop on there without falling in the drink in between.
Oh, that incident. Oh, I just was going to say, when that incident happened, I was a kid, so I wasn't so savvy about things. I just thought I was a jungle jam woman,
Yeah. No, I'm
but
sure.
But still, it's something to be mindful of. But yeah, I was just going to say too, if we don't get through all of them, Jerome, we can always do a part 2.
Well, we're at 50 minutes already, and we're coming up on number 5. No, number 4.
Yep.
So let's just keep plugging away. This one actually would be pretty darn easy, and that is preventing electrical fires on board. There's really 2 things. One, probably the most important, is any electrical equipment you have needs to be fused. There always needs to be a fuse on everything, so that if those wires start to overheat from any sort of power surge, the fuse will pop and the circuit is disconnected, and it will prevent the outer casing of that wire from melting and then possibly starting a fire. The only other thing that can add to that as well is keeping your boat clean and lint-free. Behind all these cupboards and all this sort of stuff, piles of dust build up and hairs and all this gross stuff. And if every once in a while you go through and you clean all that out and inspect your wires, you're gonna probably end up with, without any sort of issue for years and years to come. Most boat fires come from electrical equipment that doesn't have fuses on it, and that stuff goes up when it overloads and the outer casing catches fire.
Okay, so and if you do have an electrical fire on board, what are some quick thinking things we do? We have our extinguisher, right?
You got the extinguishers and all that and the chemical ones, but the number one thing is to cut the power source as quickly as possible. Shutting off your battery switch, unplugging your shore power, anything to stop the electricity from flowing, because a lot of times if that sucker's sparking and all this sort of stuff and fire actually has already started, you could, and we've done this. I've had an experience with this where we're trying to put this thing out with a fire extinguisher, but there's electricity still being fed to it. So every time you finish with the fire extinguisher and run it completely out of its use, and it only takes about 30 seconds before that fire started right back up. And it's because it was still being fed by electricity. And, we were in such a panic that we had no idea what we were really doing. So that's one of the big ones, is that if you can cut all the power, make sure all that's off, and then go ahead. And if you start with one fire extinguisher, use the whole thing up. Don't just be like, oh, I think it's out. Just keep on sweeping until that one runs out, and then go grab the next one.
Yeah, I'm assuming there must be some sort of requirement, USCG, about how many you should have on board per foot of boat. Is that correct? Or how does that work?
Usually comes down to cabin spaces and all that. I mean, usually it's one where, in my mind, and I don't know what the U.S. Coast Guard regulations would be, but if I have a forward cabin on my boat, there's gonna be one up in the forward cabin. There will be one in the main cabin. There will be one for the galley, and there will be one for the engine room. And usually the engine room, if you really want to double down, sometimes they make these little tiny portholes that are just made for the hose or the little nozzle on a fire extinguisher to be able to just push into that, and then you can dispense an entire fire extinguisher into the engine room without having to open any hatches, thereby feeding that fire with a whole bunch of new oxygen. There's a million different firefighting techniques, and I would say study up on them. And that's easily something where you can go on the Coast Guard websites, and you can also definitely read up on the subject to get as many tips as possible.
Okay. Anything else that you want to say about electrical fires?
No, I think that's pretty much it. It really does come down to those fuses. Those fuses are absolutely essential.
Okay. How about the next item, seasickness? What's your strategy to prevent seasickness? Or do you not get seasick? Are you lucky?
Thankfully, I do not suffer from seasickness anymore. I did when I was a kid, and somehow it magically sort of disappeared once I became an adult. But I know that's not the case for everybody. And I've seen people do everything from Dramamine to those pressure point patches to like copper rings to the little patches that go behind your ears to more of the hardcore drugs that I think the U.S. Navy uses. I think it's called like Seroquel or something. I don't know the exact name. I'm sure there's a big list of all the chemical compounds, but some of the more traditional ones would be ginger. Ginger root is supposed to be pretty good, whether you eaten, in a cookie form or you actually just slice little pieces of ginger. An old one from sailing time, long ago, was to take a shot of sherry, which I've never even tasted sherry, so I don't know. But when I mention that to anybody who has, they're like, "Oh my God, that's the last thing I would want." Supposedly that helps. I think if you start to feel seasick, one of the big things is don't go down below on that boat. Stay up on deck, stay in the breeze. I know I've heard about, keeping your eye on the horizon. You had mentioned that when you're going up the mast as a possible sort of prevention, and trying to keep some food in the stomach and stay hydrated. That's a big one, and it's counterintuitive because it's the last thing you want to do if you're seasick is try and eat something, but saltine crackers and just some water are usually very easy for your stomach to deal with, and they also kind of fill it up a little bit. But it can become like a snowball effect in a lot of ways, where you're seasick and so you don't eat anything, and now you're hungry, which kind of makes you a little queasier, which makes you more seasick, so you're less likely to eat, and you can see how it just keeps going and going.
Yeah, I was always told that if you're getting ready to, leave, to make a passage, to have a full stomach, to, like you were saying, to have food in the stomach, and that is a better choice as opposed to not. So, I've only been seasick a couple times, and when it happened to me, I think it was exactly as you said. I was in the cabin when things started getting a little rolly down there. I hadn't come out from waking up and all that jazz. And so, yeah, that's what basically kicked it off for me.
Yeah, the down below thing is the major one, because I've seen people go from totally fine, having the loveliest experience on deck, and they're like, oh, I'm going to go down and grab a water. And before I can stop them, they go down below, and within 30 seconds, they come up and they're over the side.
Yeah. Isn't that wild how that happens so quickly?
Yeah.
So I guess, like you covered the strategies, and anything else that you can think of? I mean, I know this is, like you said, it can be one that can snowball out of control. And especially if you're a solo sailor, right? That would be really dicey if you are seasick and you're the only person on board.
Yeah.
Having to deal with everything.
Just an absolute nightmare. At least then, your pride isn't going to get hurt because it's just you. But, if I think it's one of those two where if the nausea and everything sets in, don't fight it. Just, let it go, throw up, feed the fish, and then go immediately and get some water and get some crackers and put those down. And, you may end up throwing those right up in 5 minutes, but don't skip that part of the cycle, because eventually you will find your sea legs. The nausea will subside, but it's going to do that a lot faster if you have a little bit of food in your stomach.
Okay, well, let's talk not just about food now, but how about water and how important staying hydrated is when you're out. Yeah, and some of the dehydration dangers that can occur.
Well, and I think this one is the same with hiking. It's the same with being outdoors. It's the same with just being, alive, is that we need water, and we need to, we can't just have our coffee in the morning and a cocktail at cocktail hour and then just call it good. Your body needs water, and especially if you're out at sea in this salty area, I think it needs it even more, because you're kind of getting your body's getting salt dried the whole time that you're out there, at least a little bit. And I think sometimes, especially if there's seasickness or there's weather or something like that takes priority, all of a sudden you kind of be like, dude, I don't know if I even drank a glass of water today. And, I think probably the best prevention for that is making sure that you've got a nice water bottle, something, 32 ounces that you can fill up in the morning. And then maybe you try and get that schedule down so that you're drinking a couple of those a day. And that's going to keep you pretty well hydrated. Excuse me, for the duration of the day. Yeah.
Well, as someone who can speak from suffering from dehydration and the results of it, I was hospitalized for that. So I was sick with the flu at the time, and I lived in New Mexico where it's quite dry. And yeah, I ended up in the hospital because I was dehydrated. So it's no joke. You don't recognize or realize that. It was a very scary experience. That's all I can say. So yeah, drink up the water for sure.
Well, and don't you start to sort of lose your cognitive abilities and like decision making and all that?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely experienced that. I wasn't hallucinating. Well, I guess I sort of was a little bit. It wasn't so much a hallucination of seeing things that weren't, well, the way that things looked. the colors looked weird. I just was like, wait a minute, that wall's supposed to be green, but it looks like some other color. And so, yeah, so my brain was definitely perceiving things weird, and I had terrible arrhythmia.
Oh,
And I
jeez.
ended up calling 911 because I thought I was having a heart attack, actually. I thought I was dying. And it
Wow.
turned out I was dehydrated. Yeah. Yeah. That was, like I said, I had the flu, and I usually am really good about drinking fluids, but I just, with the dryness of that climate, and I wasn't. So that's what ended up happening. You don't want to be in that position. Trust me.
No. Oof. Couldn't imagine.
Okay. And then the other thing just that I would say is kind of tailing on the whole seasickness thing, to keep the water with you in the cockpit so you don't have to go down below, right?
Yes, like preemptive. So, before you set off, you go ahead and make sure that if it's a little bit rolly when you get outside of the inlet, nobody has to go down below for anything. So you've got your sunscreen, you got some water, you got a couple snacks laying around, all the things that, somebody might have to just duck down, because it's no joke. Like, if you're susceptible to it, you could be totally fine on deck, but the moment you go down below, you lose the horizon. It gets your inner ear and your balance all out of whack, and it literally only takes seconds. And once it starts, a lot of times there's really no going back. You're going to be hanging your head over the rail, feeding the fish in one form or another, and yeah, you just want to prevent that, because there's no better way to ruin a day out sailing than being seasick.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this next thing on our list is something that I would say for me is, I mean, I know we said we really probably couldn't put these in an order of worst to whatever case scenario, whatever. But for me, this next one, through hull failures,
Yeah.
and how to prevent that. This is something that is to the point for me where I've actually try to stay away from sailboats that have through hulls, because I just don't want to deal with them, because I don't have professional help, and I just don't trust my experience and knowledge to be able to deal with them. So can you sort of give us an idea about, this particular topic, and how we can keep our boats from going out from underneath us,
Well,
because something fails?
I think it's definitely a warranted fear, but I do think a lot of times people overcomplicate it and sort of over exaggerate exactly, the condition of their through hulls. Like, people will almost treat it like standing rigging, where they're like, I got to rip all these through hulls out because I don't know how old they are. And, a lot of ways you just got to use a little bit of common sense when you're looking at them and inspecting them. If they look really good and they're pretty much corrosion free, and when you grab the handle and exercise it, open and close it, there's not a whole lot of strain that needs to be had. If the hose clamps look good, all that sort of stuff, then you've probably got yourself a pretty good through haul. And, when the boat's hauled out of the water, you can see where that through haul is coming out. And you can kind of inspect that area on the outside as well as the inside of the boat. But, essentially you've got some of these old school ones, which Sparrow has a lot of those, where there's a gasket inside and you have to, ease one little handle, and then you can switch from open to closed, and then you tighten it back down. And sometimes these drip a little bit. But they have been working absolutely fine for me. I'm looking also at how these things are screwed into the actual through hull, because you'll typically have the through hull, which is just a nipple that comes into the boat that then a valve or a seacock is actually screwed into, and then you have the hose connected to that. And essentially, yeah, just a good inspection and always trying to exercise them, because the time at which these probably could snap or have damage done to them where all of a sudden water starts coming in is if you haven't opened or closed that valve in a year and a half, and it takes you putting a wrench on the handle to get it to move. Well, if you're having to do that, all of that torque is actually going on to that through hull and that valve. And, that is where you're putting so much pressure on it that if you've got a weak one, that's where it's going to break. Or if something breaks free in the engine room and smashes up against it, that also is a time where, oh, it could take one of these through hauls out. Now, that is just the inspection part. What do you do if it actually happens? Well, that's what those wooden bungs are for on all the boats, that are set up properly. Each through haul typically is going to have one of these very soft wood bungs, these little cones that can basically, they're pretty sizable, so they can fit a smaller hole, or you just keep pushing them in and hammering them in, and they can cover a hole that's about 2.5 inches wide. And essentially those aren't to seal that leak completely, but they're just to prevent a huge amount of water from coming in, so that you can have a few minutes to decide exactly what you're going to do and how else you might be able to attack it.
Yeah, I have seen ones that they make out of like a foam as well. Like it's like a almost like a Nerf ball type of foam. Have you ever seen those?
I haven't seen that. Most of the ones that I have experience with are just this really soft wood, where if you stuck it into the hole, then you hit it with like a rubber mallet or something like that. It'd stick itself in there, and then as that bung actually starts to take up water, it expands and then seals better and better and better. But again, you're not trying to completely stop all the water from coming in. You're just trying to stop the 1-inch hole that's in your boat from gushing water in. You just want to basically tamper it down to the point where your bilge pumps can keep up with it, and it's not we're sinking crisis, and it's more of we've got this leak and we've got to deal with this sort of situation. The only other thing I would really say on the subject is, a lot of boats will have a map of where all the through hulls are on the vessel, and you keep that in your nav station, so that, if you have a huge amount of salt water that is in your bilge and you don't know where it's coming from, the first place you're really going to be looking is at all those through hulls to see if typically it's just a hose clamp has come off and the actual hose has popped off of the valve. Rarely is it the actual valve that has broken, but that is a possibility as well. And so knowing the location of every single one is a very, very smart move.
Okay, and do you have a preference for the kinds of fittings, like the plastic versus the is it bronze or brass? And I mean, I just am curious if you have any thoughts on, because a lot of them. Some people recommend the plastic ones, and some people say don't get plastic, because if you have a boat fire, they're going to melt. And I don't know, if I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I really don't. Just because I think there's pros and cons for both of them. The plastic ones definitely, because they can't corrode, essentially that's pretty cool, but it's plastic. It's not as strong as bronze. So Sparrow doesn't have any of the plastic ones on board. But only because that's, not what she came with, I guess. But I don't know. The plastic ones are pretty beefy, though. I will say the ones that I have been able to get my hands on, it's like, okay, well, this thing is pretty darn thick plastic. But I suppose, the other thing to consider is that I have heard that boats sometimes hit by lightning have had through hulls blow out. And it would be because they were the metal ones. I would think, who knows what goes on when that amount of voltage hits your boat. I mean, thankfully, I don't know. We'd have to talk to Brendan about that, or Brandon, sorry.
Yeah.
But
yep.
Yeah, it's one of those where I think it's whatever you're comfortable with. And yeah, I think there's pros and cons for both of them. So you just kind of have to pick which one is going to make you feel a little more secure.
Yeah, good point. Well, the last thing on our list, we got it, we made it, is something that I have had happen one time, a rigging failure, and how we can prevent that from happening. And my story real quick is that I lost an upper shroud on the starboard side while on a starboard tack. And the reason why it failed is because the seizing or safety wire that attached the spreader, or I'm sorry, the stay to the spreader failed. And so the lesson learned for me is before I stepped the mast, I should have checked those. The boat was trailered to me from the East Coast to the Midwest, so it had a sizable distance it traveled. And I don't know how old the seizing wire was. I have no idea. The boat was pre-loved, pre-owned, whatever. But yeah, it failed, and so that was a little bit of a disconcerting situation to be in. So I did learn my lesson from that. What are some other rigging failures that come to mind for you, Jerome?
Well, I think really you've nailed it on the head, and that's giving your overall rigging when the mast is down, or even if your mast is still up on the boat, say it's a larger vessel. Before I do any passage of any sort of length, if I haven't been up the mast and done a thorough inspection of all the pins, the split pins, a good glance over the wire rigging, looking for any single wire in the whole group of spun wires that's starting to let go. I'm looking for corrosion, cracks, rust, all that sort of stuff. That inspection is what really is going to be the make or break, because if you don't do it and there is something that's just about to let go, you can almost count on the fact that it's going to let go on you once you head out and start putting it under load. I think it really is, like you said, it's about taking a good look at it. And yeah, like in your case, I mean, it was something where you got the repercussions of it. And so that's a lesson that you've got for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah. Yep. I think another one, I don't know about offshore sailors if you guys do this, but here in little inland lakes, oftentimes sailors use rigging tape, to tape
Oh yeah.
on the turnbuckles and whatnot. And so something that I also learned is that, I don't change it out every year. And I learned that I really probably should,
Yeah,
because
definitely do.
you just don't know. That's what I learned last season, is that, oh, wow, I didn't know that happened, and out of sight, out of mind. And that's kind of, I think, a little bit of the danger of using the rigging tape in that way, because you just think, oh, it's secure, it's taped up, nothing's going to happen, right? Well, that's not always the case. So, um, yeah, I just decided, for me at least, I think it's because you just don't know necessarily what's lurking underneath there.
100%.
I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
Oh, no, totally. You're spot on
Yeah.
both accounts. Inspecting it when you can, when it's easy, and then also making sure that you can see all of it, because you don't know what sort of thing is going on, especially if you're using quite a bit of tape that may be covering up your whole turnbuckle or the anchor point into the chain plate. This is where cracks can occur or wear and tear happens. And, once you've inspected it though, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I put tape all over every ring ding, every little split pin that's coming out. Those should always be either taped up or housed in some sort of cover, because, it doesn't take much more than a sheet rubbing against it just the right way to grab a little thing. And then all of a sudden, boom, that split pin is gone.
Yeah.
And that pin is just waiting for the moment when it's on the lee side and it's loose, and it just flings right out. But yeah. And if you have, again, if you have a rigger that you really trust, you can always have them take a second look. Obviously it'll cost you some money, but they're the pros, and they're the ones that can tell you. And I would also add to that, just having some semblance of an idea of how old your standing rigging is on the boat, because I've heard everything from, 10 to 15 years for certain types of standing rigging. Like, no matter what wear and tear they've had, you want to make sure you replace them by this date, that sort of thing. So kind of knowing the age and knowing the use of the current rigging that you have is probably a good idea.
And are you of the school of thought that if a boat is always, I'll just say that when I was boat shopping in Lake Superior, I had several boat brokers say, oh, well, you don't have to worry about this rigging on a 50-year-old boat because it's only been in freshwater. And I thought, I don't know about that. I don't feel so confident in that.
I know a few riggers that would definitely disagree with that. They would say, if that stuff's been on the boat for this many years, definitely replace it. But again, that one, it depends on who you listen to.
Yeah. Well, one last tip I want to say is your tip that you taught me last year on Lake Superior. Instead of spending all that money on rigging tape, what can you use as an alternative?
Oh, white electrical tape from like Home Depot. It's super cheap. It stays on there. And yeah, it leaves a little bit of goop on whatever you tape it on, but it's nothing that a little bit of acetone can't take off. Plus, you're just going to end up putting tape back over the top of it anyway, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. No, I love that tip that you shared with us. I think it's great. Yeah.
Now, Shell, I still have
we got
two
through
more.
all of them. Is there anything else you wanted?
I have 2 more on my list.
You have
That's
more?
only 8. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't have the other 2, so
well.
I'll have to listen to what you have to say.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's
I'm missing them.
We'll reverse the course here. The number 9 that I have is keeping drinking water safe on board. Any thoughts?
Ooh, yeah. So that's something that scares me a little bit. I remember you said that the water tasted a little funny on Sparrow, and you had to go through some steps to make it better, right?
Yeah, I've
that's not just with the
dealt with it a
taste,
lot.
the safety. I think it was safe. It just didn't taste so good, right?
Well, and I've also had unsafe water that was making me sick for sure. Bacteria was growing.
Right. In your book, you talk about that.
Yeah. And it's something that happens, sometimes there was a trip not too long ago where I left Florida and I filled up my tanks, and within a day, just one day, it was as foul of water as I had ever tasted. And it was just, I don't know what was coming out of those pipes or what was going on, but it was disgusting. And yeah, I was kind of like, wow, okay, so now I have 70 gallons of terrible water that I really can't drink.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. Yikes. So what did you do? You just empty it out, and do you have to you sterilize the tanks again? Is that what you did, or?
Eventually, yeah, I emptied them out. I mean, typically what I'll do is, when I get to port or if I'm about to do a passage or something like that, if I want to clean the tanks, really, I'm going to fill the tanks up, and as I'm filling them, I'm going to add a little bit of Clorox bleach, and I'm going to let that sit in the full tank and also have it run through the flexible hose piping and all the fittings and stuff like that. But, eventually you can't drink that. So you've got to basically take that and empty the tanks back out. And then usually I have 35-gallon tanks, and I'll put maybe 1 drop of bleach inside of each tank, to the point where 1 drop with 35 gallons, I pretty much can't taste it at all. But I'm also, running that for drinking water. It's running through a couple different filters and then an actual Brita filter like you would find in your house into a pitcher. And that will alleviate any sort of taste or anything like that out of the water that I'm sort of drinking. And, I've learned the hard way that no matter what, I'm going to purchase about 5 or 6 gallon jugs of, spring water or whatever from the grocery store before I go. And I'm not going to just peel right through those. I'll usually keep a couple of them in standby mode so that if something does happen to the water, the major water supply on board, like the primary tanks, then I've at least got a few days worth of, because you can ration down to say 32 ounces a day, and that'll, 3 gallons is going to get you quite a long ways to get back to land, or at least be able to sort the problem out.
What are your feelings about the methods that thru hikers use with like the SteriPens and all that? Could you just in that case have something like that on board? And if you have suspicions that the water is foul in the tank, that you could use like a SteriPen to still be able to drink it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, because that was one of the things that I really wish I would have had on the trip around the world. And that's just like a standard camping water pump. We used to go camping up in the north of northern Michigan, and we're sucking on water out of these brown lakes, and it tasted okay, but we knew that it was clean and it was virus and bacteria free. And I thought to myself, geez, it would have been so nice to have this on Sparrow, because I could have stuck that in the main water tank and just pumped. And now I've at least got safe drinking water. I mean, you can boil it, but you only have a certain amount of propane. But nowadays they have, instead of pumping, you just have these big gravity feed bags that are like 10 liters that you can fill up. And then I could hang it there, and it's going through one of those nice filters, and it's taking all the bacteria and all that out of there. And a lot of them have those little charcoal fittings so that it's good for the taste as well. So, I think your point is kind of layering your ability to clean water, even if it does get a little bit tainted, which does happen, especially if you're catching rainwater. Eventually, every once in a while, you'll get a little bit of salt water in there, and that's got bacteria, and that stuff grows like wildfire.
That's what happened in your situation, right? Wasn't it that you had water you collected from rain and then it spoiled or something? Is that what it was?
Yeah, but I was collecting water from day like 80 all the way through to day 271. So there were so many cases of water coming in. And I tried desperately to keep it as pure as possible, but, you're always going to screw that up a little bit, or at least I am. And, eventually the clouds started to form towards the end. And it was more in the tropics where it was warmer for sure. But, it's tough. And one of the solutions I had for that was, I don't immediately, unless I'm getting some deluge where also I'm just catching, 40, 50 gallons in an hour. If I am able to capture like 2 or 3 gallons, I'm not going to put it in my main tanks immediately. I'm actually going to hold off and keep it there in these separate little tanks for a couple of days, because usually if it does go off, it's going to go off pretty quick. Normally, if you catch water that has Sahara dust in it in the Eastern Atlantic, if you have it for more than 24 hours, it's going to kick off and it stinks and you can't drink it. And it's that quick that this bacteria and stuff grows. And I'm sure there's other places in the world where catching rainwater is one of those things where if you don't drink it immediately, you might as well just toss it overboard.
So isn't there some also, I mean, I know it's a little bit off topic, but you're supposed to let the rain wash the sail off if you're using that method, right? First, before you actually start collecting it for drinking, right?
Oh, you have to. Yeah, because your sails have so much salt on them. And if you get any salt in there, I mean, watch out. Drinking salt water, even if it's briny, it's no good.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. What was, well, anything else that you can think of with that you wanted to tell people about? Because I don't have a lot of experience with that one. Being an inland lake sailor, I'm not too far away from.
When you can dip right into the lake that you're sailing on and you could live off of that, maybe you wouldn't want to drink, Lake Superior for long, but you could survive, right?
Yeah, it makes me think though about getting like one of those starry camping pens that people talk about when they're through hiking. I mean, I didn't never think about that, but now that we're talking about it, maybe it's not just one of those bad ideas, just to kind of keep one of those in your little sailor's toolbox sort of thing.
Yeah, you get yourself a little life straw or something, and they're not very expensive, and you can just fill a water bottle up with whatever water you got, and then boom, you can just start sucking that stuff down. Because again, we're just talking about survival. We're not talking about longevity or anything like that. So, it does help. But I think the only other one, if you're going to be on an extended ocean voyage, it would definitely behoove anybody who's doing that to have some sort of desalinating pump. The most basic ones are just little hand pumps, and they don't produce very much, but they might be able to get you through a little dry spell and get you back into the rain. So it's good to have that backup. When you don't have the backup, life gets pretty unnerving for sure.
One other thought I wanted to ask your opinion on is if you're looking to buy a new boat, I would assume that the recommendation, especially if it's an older boat, maybe, maybe the recommendation would be just to go ahead and sterilize the tank before you start using it, huh?
Yeah, I would think that
out of precaution.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. Or, if you're, that can be just one of the checklist items when you're doing your sea trial or anything like that. And it's, fill the water tank up and take a taste test through the faucet and see what it smells like, see what it tastes like. And if anything seems off, then yeah, absolutely. Just empty them out and clean them. If you can gain access and actually clean it with a rag and everything, that's the best. But if you can't do that, flushing the system with a little Clorox bleach definitely helps.
Are the tanks nowadays more plastic versus metal too, would you say? I think that's hasn't that been where the industry has moved from metal to plastic with the tanks not holding tanks, but for a water?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, most modern boats that I've been on have plastic tanks, and usually when people refit, they'll switch over to plastic. Sparrow's got plastic ones, and I wouldn't mind having stainless steel ones, but the plastic ones work just great, and they're very durable. I don't know if they're probably filling my brain with lots of little plastic forever chemicals, but so is everything else.
The microplastic.
So, yeah, what are we gonna do here?
Yeah. Well, those are really good things to know. I mean, like I said, I'm definitely going to keep that in mind because water is important, right?
Yeah, water is the lifeblood out there. It's above food, it's above all of it. If you don't have water, oh yeah, it's so unnerving when your water level is really low and you're in the middle of an ocean somewhere. That is for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so are you ready for the last one?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So number 10 was water ingress basics. So common places to check on a boat and look for, etc. So this, I'm assuming, is water actually getting into the hull material, the deck material, and starting to rot your boat from the inner core out. Correct?
Yeah, I'm thinking definitely in that capacity, water intrusion. And also just getting back to what you said about through hulls. If you all of a sudden you start seeing water, your cabin sole floorboards are floating, where are you gonna, check first? You were saying probably the through hulls, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, in both capacities, I'm thinking just in water intrusion in terms of rot and also in a catastrophic situation as well.
Well, I think you've actually had a bit more experience with this on some of your vessels, haven't you? Where you find like soft areas or damaged wood and find out that obviously
I did.
Water's coming in somewhere. So what were those experiences like?
Well, so with one boat that I had, I didn't. Well, the bilge was always bone dry because I will say that I'm definitely OCD about checking the bilge of my boats, and I always used to kind of not brag, but just feel like, oh, my boat is always dry. Well, at some point in the past, with somebody who had the boat prior to me, unbeknownst to me, there was an issue of water intrusion that I discovered that was near the bulkhead near the chain plate, I would say, and the marine polyboard on the interior of the boat. And I never even noticed it when I first got the boat. And I was able to discern that the boat did come that way because I had video footage of the boat arriving, and I had, done my little YouTube video tour and all that. And a year after I had the boat, I discovered that this marine polyboard that was just 4 of the starboard bulkhead separating the V-berth from the main settee area, it was warping. And I'm like, well, what the heck is this? Where did this come from? Well, it was a mystery, and it was not soft. There was no dripping. I looked behind where the chain plates were on the inside and on the outside, and I really could not discern what the problem was and where it was coming from. So I even contacted the manufacturer, who at the time was still in business. And they said to me either chain plate or deck to hull. And so, I just assumed that it must have been a prior problem that must have been remedied by a caretaker before I took ownership, because like I said, the bilge was dry. I saw no dripping inside along the side of the boat. Nothing looked wonky on the outside of the boat. But here's where this whole rigging tape thing comes in. Okay. So I had to put the rigging tape on the boat when I first got the boat. And then later, I don't know. I feel like I did replace it at least one time. I had the boat basically 3 seasons. And I feel like maybe I didn't replace it the second season, or I did. I can't remember. But the long and the short of it is that when I sold the boat, the person who was buying the boat took the rigging tape off because he wanted to, take the mast down, and so he could trailer the boat back. And it turned out that one of the chain plates where the rigging tape had covered, it's like the top, I don't know how to describe it. It looks like almost like a metal strap. But there was just an ever so slight turn, or like a little twist at the very tippy top of it, which I think must have been what caused that leak. Because in the past, like I said, I think somebody must have fixed it because it wasn't an active leak. But because that rigging tape had been on there, I didn't even think, that maybe that could be the culprit. But I think it must have been. But again, the boat came that way. And everything is 20/20 hindsight, as they say. And looking back to pictures, I did see where that little turn was at the very top. If you can imagine like a metal strap at the very top of it, there's a little tiny twist. And so I'm thinking that's what the buyer thought too, is that that's probably where that came from. So I don't know. I mean, these things, that's definitely a clue that you have a problem when you have warping, or if you have dripping, or if you have softness, all these things. And it's like I said, for me, I didn't even think, because I was looking inside, outside. The chain plate looked fine, but I didn't even think about the top part of it that was covered under the rigging tape. That to me was where again, like I said, you really need to take that stuff off and not just assume that everything is good to go underneath it. And just for full disclosure, this did not happen while I owned the boat. It was before I owned the boat. So I wasn't trying to pull a fast one or something like that on me. I honestly didn't know that looked like that or was like that, in the sense that it would be an issue. I just I didn't know enough to know back when I got the boat that would have been something that would have caused an issue potentially like that. I only think that that's what it was. I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling, I suspect that must be what it was that caused that polyboard to have that warping in there inside the boat. So yeah, you got to be on the lookout. And staining around the port lights or portholes of your boat, that's something else. If you have wood around it, that's another thing. But just don't always assume too it's from water leaking in. It could also be, like where I live, it's very humid. So there, you can get stains just from condensation. So it is like you have to be a detective really to kind of figure this stuff out.
So
and
really,
I think for me, at least, I only learn by going through the experience. It's hard to know because there's a multitude of things that can happen in this sort of way. So, yeah, that was my experiences with the water staining on the inside of the boat from condensation, and not because a seal or gasket was leaking, because I had that happen on a different boat actually. And then the inside of the boat, the marine polyboard that is like lines the inside of the hull and the cabin. Like if you see something wonky with that, you got to get on that and figure out what's going on with it. And whether it's active or not active is another important thing too, which, you can figure that out after it rains, or if you want to spray water on the boat with a hose and look below. And or another thing I had, Jerome, I think I told you about this too. I just remembered those little dorades that you can have on deck that allow air to flow through the cabin. I had a leak with that, and I was able to fix that. Yeah, so you just got to keep an eye on all those deck fittings and
Yeah,
You have
anywhere
to
that
eat.
you have actual, holes in the boat where, you've got
Yeah.
bolts or you've got fittings or chain plates, anything that's going through the deck or through the hull, that's definitely a spot where water ingress could be happening. And then like you're saying, kind of looking all around down below, always keeping an eye out, looking for drips and stains or warping, any indication that water might be getting in from the outside. And then, worst case
Mhm.
scenario, you don't notice any of that, but then all of a sudden you're stomping around on the deck one day and you notice a nice soft spot. And that's where, if you
Yeah.
don't know how to do it, you need to get somebody who does know how to fix and remedy that. Because again, like a lot of the other things, it'll snowball into something really serious. And the earlier you catch it, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and you never want to, just like I said, just think. I mean, it's so easy, like an out of sight, out of mind thing, right? If you're not really keeping an eye on things, like with the rigging tape example, it's like you could be inviting disaster. So you gotta, not just from a rigging standpoint, but like I said, just from trying to figure out, if water had been getting in through that chain plate because of that, whatever damage had occurred with whomever had the boat prior to me. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you really do have to stay on top of that stuff. It's a lot to keep track of, and also just it's that whole, like, when, have you heard that expression, watchful waiting? So like you can see something and you may think, maybe it's not that bad or whatever, but you got to make sure you're always following up on it, and that something that like is a molehill doesn't become a mountain, sort of thing. And then you're really up the creek trying to get something fixed, or you know what I mean? It's just, don't make more work for yourself in the end. And
Yeah.
certainly don't compromise your safety either, the safety of the vessel and your own safety in that regard. So yeah,
Well,
important stuff.
yeah, and keeping that boat and the deck and the hull and everything as strong as humanly possible is a big safety feature that you want to, be diligent with. So it's definitely worth taking a look and always inspecting. And I think that kind of goes verbatim with all the stuff that we've talked about. Is, a lot of it's just having eyes on everything and taking the time to do a thorough inspection of any and all systems. And you're looking for those telltale signs, and that I think really will help the longevity and the safety of any vessel.
And that all ends up with how much you can enjoy it as well, right? Because if
Yes.
if you, it's really not worth it if you can't enjoy it. You want to
Yeah.
be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So yeah, that's what keeps us out in the water sailing and enjoying doing what we love. By keeping our boats seaworthy, right? And
Exactly. And we want to
we
make
keep
sure that,
ourselves seaworthy too.
yeah, we want to make sure we're
What's that?
safe. We want to make sure our crew is safe, and we want to make sure our boat is safe. And,
Yeah,
you do all that,
yeah.
and then you can go out there and you can have a good old time. And you can also have a bit of confidence and relax a little bit, because your boat is in good order and is ready to take on pretty much whatever Mother Nature is going to throw at her.
I would say too, just to add on to that, is if you get a new boat, don't get overwhelmed by all of this stuff, because it's very easy. I've had that happen to me. And then sometimes that ends up being a bit of a roadblock for me, and I get a little obsessive about things. So just, chip away at things one day at a time. You're not going to learn your boat overnight by any means. And, I think that there's something special about having a boat season in, season out, that you get a chance to sort of learn the boat's behavior and just, what she can take, what she can't take, and all that kind of stuff. It's just, yeah, just not to, I kind of feel like maybe it could be overwhelming when you think about all the things that we've talked about, and it might be like, oh, I just don't want to even do it because that sounds like too much to take care of. Well, it's really not. It's just that, you just
Take it
got to
one
take it in
thing at a
stride, I
time.
guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
cool. Well, that's
Yeah.
our
Well, this has been
list.
awesome.
I think we did it. Woo!
I'm so
Finally.
stoked, because I think this is really a great, a great sort of conversation to have. Hopefully all of our listeners are going to feel like they got something out of this, and I would encourage people to reach out. If you can think of other things, I just would be curious to hear what other people, if they have other thoughts that have come up from our conversation about things they'd want to share about staying safe and keeping us out in the water safely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million things, million different examples, and like I said in the beginning, where it is an extreme sport, sailing. You're putting yourself out into an environment that you can't survive in without the actual vessel underneath your feet, especially if you're going hundreds and hundreds of miles offshore. So, it's a bit of a risk, but that's what we try and do, use our brains, mitigate the risks, and try and have as much fun and be as safe as possible, right?
Yes, right on. That's exactly it. Well, I definitely learned a lot from you, Jerome, today, and I just want to thank you for taking a lot of your time, these scenarios, and it's for me. Like I said, I'm gonna listen to this one. I'm sure more than one time for sure, because there's just so many golden nuggets of wisdom and information and advice, and there's a lot of good information here, I think. So I really appreciate your willingness to participate with me in this, because you have a lot to offer, and I'm just very grateful for that. So thank you so much for coming on to speak with me about these safety issues.
My pleasure, and thank you for sharing your experiences and your insight as well. Don't count yourself short, Shell. You've definitely got a wealth
My limited
of knowledge.
insight.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and can't wait till we do our next one.
Sounds good, Jerome.
If you are enjoying my podcasts, please consider following and/or subscribing to my show. Your support truly means the world to me, as well as inspires me to keep bringing you stories from others out there with a passion for getting out on the water. Until next time, fair winds.